Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. I'm Gary Polland, and this week's co-host is Laura Murillo. Welcome.
Thank you.
Excited to have you here.
Thank you.
This week on Red, White, and Blue, we're going to be talking about the City of Houston's financial situation, what it presently is, and we're going to get into some other interesting topics about the challenges this city faces, our city. We're going to be also talking about a little bit about the two propositions on the ballot and get some insight from two distinguished guests. First, Chris Brown, who is the City of Houston's controller, very important job. And then second, Dave Martin, Houston City Council District E, Chairman of Budget and Fiscal Affairs. And so I look forward to the insight from both you gentlemen. So let me start with my pet peeve, kind of a couple of pet peeves.
Sure.
Pet peeve number one, our roads and streets are awful. I have driven in third world countries that have better roads in the city of Houston, and it wasn't always that way. I believe that over the last 8 years, 10 years, it has just deteriorated. And I understand that there's a constant need to maintain, to improve, keep our roads in the way they need to be. And I find we're not doing that. But I do find one thing we were able to do is spend $200 million on the Galleria Transit Way for a bus that's going to go in the Galleria, by the way, where we had some of the best roads in the city before they got ripped up. So I'll start with Dave. He's the chairman of the Budget Committee, so he's on council. Dave, how did we end up in this situation?
Well, Gary, since I had the opportunity to work in two administrations, it started many years before Turner. And our emphasis this year has been on mobility and infrastructure and getting back to where we were about 10, 15, 20 years ago, in that we have good roads and good infrastructure and the mobility's improved to get people from place to place. I think we've neglected our roads. We didn't put enough money into them. And I think you're paying for what you're seeing today is that lack of infrastructure, lack of streets you can have really good projects on. And we're spending a lot of money doing it, but we're not doing a very good job of it. I think we can do better, and I think we need to have the dedicated funds move towards that.
Do you have any insight, Chris, on that?
Yeah, well,
City Controller?
Thanks for allowing me to be here. I mean, one of the themes that we've been talking about in the Controller's office is having a structurally balanced budget. And I think this speaks to a lot of what you're saying, Gary, is every year we adopt a budget, but in that budget, unfortunately, we defer a lot of expenses. Historically, people have focused on pensions. We've addressed that with the Houston Pension Solution. We're also working on the other post-employment benefits, employee health care. But a portion of that is deferred maintenance to our roadways and also city-owned facilities. So what we need to do is utilize in a more efficient manner our budget process so that we have funds every year that we can use to address these street repairs, because I agree with you, the streets are not in great condition. So essentially trying to do more with less.
Well, we're all trying to do more with less, but I do want to definitely congratulate the both of you and all of City Council for all the great work you guys did with pension reform. I know that was a very big hurdle. It's behind us now, but you've got a couple of other things that we need to talk about. And so let's start with Proposition A and tell us a little bit about that and what it means to the city as we talk about infrastructure.
So Proposition A deals with Rebuild Houston, which was a proposition voter imposed that was passed many years ago. Through different legal challenges, there were some questions about ballot language. Ultimately, what ended up happening is that the courts deemed that we should go back to the voters to affirm that this should be a dedicated lockbox. Essentially, that money that is taken from the water bills that people are paying in the form of drainage fee is put into a dedicated fund that is then used for drainage. So Proposition A essentially is going to reaffirm that the voters do in fact want to keep that as a dedicated lockbox. So when they're voting, they're not voting to discontinue the drainage fee, they're voting essentially to continue it as a dedicated lockbox.
How's that lockbox working, Dave? I just want to add that State Senator Paul Betancourt describes it as a lockbox without a top.
Well, that dedicated fund, if you get rid of the lockbox component of it, means that an administration can use it in the general fund for additional expenses, and we'll talk about pay parity in a minute. But the dedicated drainage and street repair fund has four sources of money. One is metro funds, the other one is off your water bill, your drainage fee, then developer fees, and then also ad valorem taxes. Dedicated drainage on the drainage component, you can only do them for storm sewer repairs, dedicated flooding initiatives. But there are a lot of times that you have to destroy streets to get to the pipes. And then you use that money for the street repairs, even though it should be coming out of the metro funds, which is dedicated to street repair. So I think we can do a better job of that. I still believe that this whole initiative is about a dedicated source of money and having the lockbox component. I'm in favor of doing that because a lot of people believe that if you vote no, the amount of money that you pay on your water bill goes away. That's not the case. You will still pay the same amount tomorrow if it's a no vote citywide, but you will lose the lockbox component that the controller talked about.
Yeah, except the lockbox is not working. And my understanding is that the mayor, or one of the mayors that you worked under, I don't want to blame Sylvester Turner totally because he inherited this. He didn't start with it,
Yep.
to be fair. But we've moved hundreds and hundreds of public works workers into this fund. We've hired a bike coordinator into this fund. And we started this conversation with how bad our streets are. So 8 years ago, we voted for this. And the concept of a lockbox dedicated to street repair and drainage made sense. And people, the polling told us, that people just supported that because they want good streets and they like more drainage. Harvey taught us that lesson. But we find we're not any better off than we were 8 years ago. We have all that money that's been taken. God knows where it went. But it didn't go to streets and it didn't go to drainage. That's a big problem. The truth is, and from where I'm at, and I'm going to give my opinion today, I'm recommending people vote no. I supported it last time. I truly believe what I was told was going to be a lockbox dedicated to these projects. We're going to make it happen. Instead, it's been used as a slush fund, essentially, by mayors to fund other aspects of the program they couldn't fund anywhere else, which brings me back to the major problem we have in this city. We don't have any priorities, Chris. You have priorities. Dave has priorities. The people have priorities. But we have today in Houston is all things for all people. That's why the council voted for $1 million homework health line that nobody needed. That's why they continue to vote for things we don't need, and we don't fully fund things that are critical, which is going to get us into part two. And you'll ask the question about the fire parity. Top priority for our citizens is public safety. It's not a slogan, it's a fact. Number two is infrastructure. If we can't do those things right, we're a failed city. That's my opinion. And it makes me really sad to say, because I've lived in the city for a long time, and I love Houston. And I'm really concerned about our future. I really believe this city is sliding toward third world status. You traveled around the world. You've been to great cities, Hong Kong, Singapore, Shanghai. They have awesome roads. They have awesome infrastructure. They plan it right. And we don't have it. And it makes me sad.
Yeah.
So I want to know, we need to do something about this, Dave. And
I think
Chris.
there's a general imbalance. Houston is growing. We're 650 square miles, I believe now. We're from a landmass area. We're one of the largest cities in the country, if not the world. With all that, it's an increased demand on infrastructure. So again, going back to my point initially about the structurally balanced budget, we need to be making sure that we're setting aside the adequate funding to support those street improvements and all the different, infrastructure building that we're doing throughout the city. And it's a challenge. And at the same time, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the revenue cap because, we're limited amount of property tax that we can take in. So that does have a debilitating effect on some of the things that you're talking about, Gary.
That's true, but it doesn't mean we're not getting increased revenue every year. So and for Dave, the question would be this. You're on city council. Mm-hmm. What can we do to actually have priorities and fund them and start ignoring all this peripheral spending that seems to take lots and lots of money away from the things that Chris is talking about and you've talked about that are critical?
When you lose the trust of the public, you're in a bad spot. And I think what happened in 2012 when we started moving some employees from one fund to the other and using the drainage component to fund the employees in public works and doing the street repairs, I think we lost the trust of the public. So I think we need to go back and revisit exactly what that dedicated fund needs to be. I'll disagree with your recommendation of no, because you're going to pay the same amount tomorrow either way.
I'm sure there'll be another lawsuit.
Yes, there will be. And I'm recommending, yes, give us a dedicated lockbox and then let us go back and work with the administration to fix it. And that when you have dedicated flooding initiatives, you spend only that money that comes off of the water bill. If you have street repairs, you use the Metro Fund, which is dedicated to the street repair component. As I mentioned, 4 buckets. You regain the trust of the constituent base, and you're better served. But the big issue is going to be pay parity, and if we give folks an increase.
Well, how about we fix one area before we jump into a whole other area
into
of
pay
town.
parity, I wanted to add one other thing. The real slogan for Rebuild Houston this time is, this time we mean it. The lockbox. Okay.
Well, let's
Now
talk
we
about
move on.
let's talk about pay parity. The mayor has said that B is not good. So firefighters are saying that they have done a great job, as we all know that they have. Many others are saying this is going to cost us in excess of $100 million per year in perpetuity.
Not correct.
Controller, what do you say?
Well, we actually just updated our numbers today. We estimated before we got the HPOU contract in place that number to be about $85 million. Okay. Now with the increases that we've just, Council just approved October 3rd for HPD, that number is raising now to $100 million for fiscal year 2020, $112 for 2021. It will continue to increase over time.
But firefighters are saying the money is there and layoffs won't be necessary.
Well, I can tell you as a city controller, the money is not there. We had going back to the structurally balanced budget, we used $100 million of one-time financing sources to bridge the budget gap last year. So we have to go out and find that money again this year. So that's $100 million we're going to start in the hole. If you add the pay parity measure on top of that, that's $200 million in the hole. Now that gets to be a significant problem from a financial standpoint for the city. So the reality of this is that, we have a collective bargaining agreement process that normally, historically, we've worked through with the firefighters to come up with something that's fair for the firefighters, and also
at the moment 9.5 is what is on the table.
Is what is on the table, and what is fair for the firefighters, and what the City of Houston taxpayers, what's fair to them as well. Okay. So we'll see what happens with Proposition B. I think either way, my office, my opinion is that we're going to have to go back to the bargaining table, and we're going to have to come up with something that is, fair for the firefighters, because they do deserve a raise. They haven't gotten a raise in 7 years, and for whatever reason they haven't gotten it. So, but at the same token, the City of Houston taxpayers cannot afford to absorb $100 million in a pay increase in this next fiscal year. We can't do it. So I think that there's some middle ground. It's going to happen at the bargaining table, but it's going to be a long road. I think Councilmember and I were talking before this, regardless of what happens with the election, there's probably going to be some legal involvement, and it's going to be a long road before we get there. But at the end of the day, I think that there is a possibility, a solution exists, that we can get a fair deal for the firefighters, and we can also have something that the taxpayers can afford.
Is it fair, because they haven't had a raise, and we have collective bargaining, and they haven't had a raise in X number, 5, 6, 7 years, and the collective bargaining obviously has failed. I mean, they haven't been able to reach agreements. You come in, they wanted, city offered what they wanted to offer, and the firemen said, no, we don't want that, and that was the end. So obviously we've had a failure there. So Dave, do you think if Proposition B passes, does that empower the firemen to have a little more stroke in the negotiations with the city?
I would think so, but you look back at the past, you say they do deserve a raise, no doubt about it. But between 2004 and 2010, Houston Police Department employees received a 15% raise. Fire received 34%. Since that time, over the last 8 years, they've been offered almost 18% increases, and they turn them down. How do you make up for salary if you don't accept raises? At my place of business, people accept a flat 1%, 2%, and people don't get the real reason behind this. It's related to pensions. So if you give them a 30% increase in pay, and their retirement is based on their highest 3 years of income, what do you think it's going to do to the pension liability that we just solved 2 years ago in the state legislature?
Unsolve it.
It is going to skyrocket, and it's going to put us in a bad spot again, because folks are retiring now. And we have the data on this that says if you retire as a firefighter on a Friday and you get a retirement check on that Monday, you make more money retired than you did working.
That sounds like California economics.
That sounds like a world I don't live in. That doesn't happen in my world, in corporate America. How do we end up
with that situation?
You vote no on Proposition B.
But there's still a problem with it. But you point out a structural problem with the pensions and how they're organized. And while we're at it, how about the work rules for the fire department and the police department that are still in the mid-20th century? I figure they probably formulated them in 1950. Hadn't changed. Every time with a fire, every time we have an ambulance dispatch, we have an engine going with them. And I understand that on the freeway because it could be dangerous for everybody. But when they come to my neighborhood and do it, I don't think that's necessary. I mean, I wonder about these things. Does anyone talk about it? The other thing, and I have met with both sides, I will tell you. I met with the police union, I met with the fire union. I've heard both of their perspectives, and I appreciate both of them. But the police union points out that the fire department has rules in place where you can be a full-time employee and you can contract out your work to someone else. at a lower rate, pocket the difference, and have a full-time job somewhere else. And they gave me 4 or 5 examples of people with big jobs outside Harris County who are full-time Houston Fire Department employees accumulating pensions. That stuff should not be allowed. That's ridiculous. I mean, how did we end up with that situation?
Well, there's definitely, I think, things that need to be improved. You mentioned work rules. I look specifically at the dispatch rules. For example, someone has a minor emergency and there are maybe 3 apparatuses sent out. One of those is a large fire truck. It's not efficient. It's a lot of wear and tear on the vehicles. In talking with the folks at the fire department, I think they agree that they need to be retooled, and there's some savings there. I think, again, it goes back to we're in a kind of
who runs the fire department?
Political,
y'all or somebody else?
Political bickering point right now, so we're not going to be able to broach any of those type of discussions until we can get this pay parity issue resolved and we can figure out what the salaries are. Then we can go in and look at ways to make
the police department is said to be top-heavy because of promotions and the like. We don't have enough officers on patrol, and the response time and the graveyard shift is an eternity. I mean, that's not good.
85%, Gary. 85% of the calls into 911 are EMS related. So do we have a Houston Fire Department, or do we run a Houston EMS department that does fire part-time? I would argue that you can outsource and go to the private sector and look at EMS. And give the Houston Fire Department an opportunity in a competitive bid situation to bid for the EMS services in the city of Houston. And then you attack fire separately. So you look at just this week, Sears and Roebuck, one of the largest companies that I grew up with, they didn't adapt to the times. The way we build buildings nowadays with fire retardant materials, sprinkler systems, we still fight fires the way we did 100 years ago when we run an EMS department. So privatize EMS, do fire segregated, and let's see how much money we can save. I guarantee you it's a formula for success.
If pay parity passes, and as the mayor has alluded, there are cuts that have to be made, a lot of these discussions are going to come to the forefront because
they actually may be a good. I mean, it sounds like ideas worthy of discussion. Have you guys?
Yeah, I think
your office. That's part of your.
You're looking at different scenarios currently.
We have looked at privatization of EMS. There are some state rules, state laws that you have to work around. It's going to be a little bit more due diligence to figure it out. But I think there is merit there, and I think there are ways that we can additionally solve. And the big thing I've looked at is the dispatch rules. Again, you shouldn't. Somebody trips and falls and sprains their ankle and they send maybe 3 different apparatuses based on the dispatch. That in itself can be changed to just, different rules about how you dispatch. Again, then you could
triage your calls a little bit better.
Yeah.
So is there interest on council for reform?
Well, I think we definitely, especially if this thing passes, we need to re-engineer the Houston Fire Department. The sad thing about it is I talked about the position on pensions. That's for the older guys. You talk to Sam Pena, the chief of the fire department, he will tell you the first guys to go, last in, first out.
Correct.
The young guys. So the young guys are going to lose their jobs, and the old guys that are almost getting ready to retire, they're going to get that 30% bump on their last 3 years that affects their retirement pay. So what do you think that looks like? Yeah. It's going to be a disastrous situation. I think the controller addressed it very comfortably and said it's unworkable. It's a solution that really has no answer to it in the way we're going.
Yeah.
Unsustainable.
Well, and interesting that the police department has taken opposition toward this. You've talked a lot with the police department and those there. What are they saying to you?
Well, the Houston Police Department understands that the fire department's trying to get in their wallet. That's a fact. Because what's going to happen is if somebody's going to have to make substantial cuts. Are we going to just cut fire to the bare bones? No, we're probably going to look at parks. We're going to look at your street repairs. Your streets are going to get worse if this happens. I'm telling you right now that's going to happen. So you take a little bit from every department. Police are understaffed right now in certain areas.
Yeah, like patrol.
Right. And they need to get more feet on the street and do it the right way. So when you make the cuts, it's going to affect every service within the city. And what we need to do is look in consolidation within the Houston Fire Department.
Do we have a zero-based budgeting program in the city of Houston?
We use performance-based budgeting. We don't do zero-based budgeting. Zero-based budgeting in a governmental entity that's $5 billion with 26,000 employees it's a very difficult thing to do.
You're going to get rid of fraud, waste, and abuse, which is probably rampant.
There's other ways to do that. I just wanted to make a comment about the pay parity and the issue when you set the firefighter pay at police pay, and I think this is a concern of the police department, is when you give raise to one, you give raise to all. So it's going to probably limit the ability for the police police department to recruit new people, because it's going to probably slow the wage growth over time, because you're not talking about 5,300 people, you're talking now adding in fire, so you're talking about over 9,000 people. Every time you give a raise, you're going to have to give it to 9,000 people. So.
Well, we compete for firemen and policemen with other major cities, I take it, in Texas, right? So how do we compare?
That's where the parity should have been drawn. Houston Fire versus San Antonio versus Dallas Fire. Not Houston Fire versus police. They do two separate jobs. They have different assignments. You need to look at parity there. I think you'll look at an editorial that your friend Bill King wrote in 2014 that drew a correlation to exactly those things. And he said when you compare them per hour, Houston Fire Department aligns very well with Dallas and San Antonio. We work a little bit less hours than those other areas, but you can adjust that. But per hourly rate today, as it exists without pay parity, it's pretty competitive. But when you look at some of the raises that they've turned down over the last 8 years, you can recognize a problem right there. There's where the hole was starting to be dug when they turned down the raises, where the Houston Police Department accepted and negotiated in a collective bargaining fashion or meet and confer every single raise they had. The interesting aside to this is now fire's going to turn over their collective bargaining to police, right? Because everything they do as a salary increase relates to police. So why do we need the fire department union to collective bargain their next raise? Because it's set by police.
Did you think, either of you gentlemen think it was a good idea for the mayor to be involved in pitting the police union against the fire union? Because coincidentally, the mayor meets with the police union, and shortly thereafter there's an announcement there's a new police raise coming down the pike. And it sure looked like it was encouraged by the mayor for them to get involved.
This has been an unfortunate byproduct of this whole exercise. And the thing, again, the controller, as the controller in the controller's office, I mean, we feel strongly that we want to get everyone back to the table, because I think it's in nobody's best interest when you have police and fire that are, I mean, this is public safety. And I think, Gary, to your point, the number one goal of government is to keep citizens safe. And when you have police and fire that are infighting, it's not good at City Hall, it's not good in the public. So, unfortunately, this pay parity measure, and this is something that they have done through petition and brought up, we're having to go through this exercise. But at the end of the day, I'm hopeful that we can get everyone back to the table and get everyone on a level playing field about what the pay is, and then it's something that the city can afford. Again, they're requesting this pay parity is around 25% in 1 year increase. The collective bargaining agreement that the mayor has proposed is 9.5% over 3 years. Right. We can manage, a 3% increase in fire department. We cannot manage a 25% increase. So
here's some data points for you. From 2004 to 2010, Houston Fire Department received 34% increase in their wages. Between 2011 and 2019, they have been offered but turned down 17.5%. So if you look at that, that's 50% salary increases since the year 2004. 50%. That doesn't happen in corporate America. That only happens here. And the relationship between their pay and their retirement is a significant issue out there in the future. And you want to talk about Houston being a third world country? Just wait to see when that happens. We won't be able to afford anything when you talk about road construction.
The real travesty in this is there was a mistake that was made, and I will say as the controller, mistake back in 2000 when we decided to renegotiate pension benefits, because essentially what we did, and not to harp on the structurally balanced budget, is we said, look, we're not going to pay these guys a fair salary. We're going to give them deferred compensation in the form of pensions. And for years, we have underfunded the pay benefits for fire and to a certain degree police, and with the understanding that when they retire, they're going to have a lucrative pension benefit. Yes. What we've done with that is we've deferred, because the city hasn't been making the payments every year. Now, we addressed that with the Houston Pension Solution, but I think what needs to happen is we have to go back and now look at a lot of these guys' pensions now have been reduced. A lot of the loopholes and things that we've talked about on this show and previously have been eliminated. So we've got to figure out now how to compensate them so that we're spending every fiscal year the amount of money that we need to spend and not deferring into the future year, i.e. kicking the can down the road. Yeah. I'm not a fan of that.
Yeah. Well, Controller, sounds like you've got a lot on your plate, and so do you, Council Member, and we certainly hope that we can come up with a solution because somebody wants the streets fixed.
Yeah, me and everybody else. Well, I want to thank Dave Martin and Chris Brown and, of course, Laura. Thank you so much for coming this week. It was enjoyable. Thanks for watching Red, White, and Blue, and we'll be back next week with another exciting show.